My name is Michael Carter. I am 38 years old, and until recently I believed my life in River North was something people envied from the outside. I work as a commercial real estate analyst in downtown Chicago, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties, but mostly consists of long hours staring at spreadsheets and forecasting market shifts before they happen. I live in a luxury condo overlooking the Chicago River, a place I inherited from my late uncle, which meant no mortgage hanging over my head and no financial stress beyond the usual investments and taxes. From the outside, my life with Emily looked polished and complete. Emily is 34, sharp, articulate, and magnetic in social settings. She works as a marketing consultant, and attention is not just something she enjoys, it is something she feeds on. She thrives in rooms full of people, thrives on likes, comments, and the subtle hierarchy of who is invited where. For 8 years, we built what I thought was a solid marriage. But over the last several months, there had been tension threading its way through our home like a silent draft under the door. We argued about small things that felt larger than they were, about schedules, about priorities, about how often she was out networking versus how often we actually sat down together without phones between us. I convinced myself this was normal, that every marriage hits a plateau, that mature adults push through discomfort instead of dramatizing it. Then came Thursday. She walked through the door earlier than usual, heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floors, eyes bright in a way I had not seen in months. She kissed me quickly, almost performatively, and announced that she had a big anniversary surprise planned at the Grand Monarch Hotel downtown. She said it with theatrical excitement, as if unveiling a campaign concept to a client. Around 50 friends and colleagues would be there to celebrate us. That was the phrase she used. Celebrate us. She insisted I wear my navy tailored suit, the one I usually reserve for investor meetings or charity galas. She said I needed to look sharp because there would be photos and speeches. The way she described it felt rehearsed, as if she had practiced the lines in her head until they sounded perfectly spontaneous. She moved around the kitchen while talking, setting her phone face down on the counter, but flipping it over every few seconds when it vibrated. Each time she read a message, the corner of her mouth lifted into a tight smile that never reached her eyes when she looked back at me. I watched her that evening more carefully than I had in a long time. She barely made eye contact during dinner, typing rapidly under the table, claiming she was just coordinating final details. When I asked who exactly was coming, she listed names too quickly, almost like she was reciting from memory. There was no warmth in her voice when she spoke about our anniversary, no nostalgia, no mention of shared memories, just logistics and presentation. It felt less like a celebration of a marriage and more like the launch of a product. Something in my gut twisted the entire time she talked. I have built my career on reading patterns, on sensing when numbers do not align with projections, and that same instinct was screaming at me that something about this did not align. The excitement felt forced, the secrecy too deliberate, the constant texting too urgent for what should have been a simple anniversary gathering. I stood there in our polished kitchen, river lights flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and realized that whatever was waiting for me at the Grand Monarch Hotel, it was not going to be the romantic milestone she claimed it would be. Saturday night arrived with a strange heaviness sitting in my chest, the kind of pressure that does not have a clear source but refuses to fade. Emily looked flawless, wearing a fitted white dress that felt more like something chosen for a press event than an intimate celebration of 8 years of marriage. The ride to the Grand Monarch Hotel was filled with surface-level chatter, her voice animated but distant, as if she were rehearsing lines in her head instead of speaking to her husband. When we pulled up to the entrance, the valet greeted us with a knowing smile that made my stomach tighten further, as though everyone already knew something I did not. We walked into a private ballroom on the second floor, and I immediately understood that this was not an anniversary dinner. The room was packed with around 50 people, almost all of them from her world rather than mine. Her co-workers clustered near the bar in sleek cocktail attire, her college friends standing in tight circles, whispering excitedly, her sister Lauren positioned conspicuously close to the stage area. Even distant acquaintances I barely recognized were there, holding champagne flutes and watching us with anticipation. There was a DJ booth set up in the corner, soft electronic music pulsing through hidden speakers, and a large backdrop with abstract gold patterns that felt like a corporate branding event. The lighting was theatrical, warm spotlights directed toward the center of the room where a small stage and microphone stand had been prepared. The atmosphere felt staged, meticulously orchestrated down to the smallest detail, like the unveiling of a new brand identity, rather than the honoring of a shared life. No framed photos of us, no montage of memories, no nod to our first apartment or the trips we had taken together. It was glossy and impersonal. Emily tightened her grip on my hand and guided me through the crowd as people parted for us, smiling too brightly, clapping lightly as if the show were about to begin. I could feel dozens of eyes scanning my face, measuring my reactions before anything had even happened. She led me to the center of the ballroom and released my hand, stepping up onto the small stage with effortless confidence. She picked up the microphone and tapped it once, the room falling silent almost instantly. The music faded. All that remained was a low hum of air conditioning and the faint clink of glass as someone shifted their drink. She began her speech with a polished smile, thanking everyone for coming to support what she called an important milestone. Her tone was controlled, practiced, every sentence flowing into the next as if memorized. She spoke about growth, about personal evolution, about realizing that sometimes love means outgrowing the structures that once felt safe. She described marriage as a beautiful chapter that had taught her resilience, but then pivoted into language about self-liberation and authenticity. She said that traditional marriage was an outdated trap, a framework designed for comfort rather than expansion. As she spoke, people in the audience nodded, some murmuring approval. Then she took a breath, squared her shoulders, and announced that she was reclaiming her independence and was officially single again. The words hung in the air for a fraction of a second before the room erupted. Applause exploded from every direction. Cheers filled the ballroom. Someone whistled loudly. Her sister rushed forward, eyes shining, as if Emily had just accepted an award on a national stage. Champagne glasses were raised in celebration. The DJ, without missing a beat, switched to a louder track that felt triumphant. I stood there in my navy-tailored suit, perfectly composed, feeling the weight of 50 people watching me like an audience waiting for the second act. Emily turned toward me slowly, lowering the microphone but keeping it in her hand. There was an expectant look in her eyes, almost hungry, as though she were waiting for me to collapse, to plead, to shout, to give her the emotional climax she had scripted in her mind. The spotlight that had illuminated her now partially caught my face as well, and I could feel the heat of it against my skin. Inside, something fundamental shifted, not explosive and not chaotic, but quiet and definitive. The applause around me sounded distant, like it was happening underwater. I felt no tears rising, no surge of anger, no desperate urge to fight for dignity in front of this carefully curated audience. What I felt instead was a cold, steady clarity settling over me, the same clarity I rely on when a market crashes and everyone else panics. She had designed this as a spectacle, a public dismantling meant to provoke a reaction that would validate her narrative. And in that moment, surrounded by cheering strangers and flashing phone cameras, I understood that whatever she expected from me, she was not going to receive it. Instead of reacting the way she clearly anticipated, instead of giving her the emotional explosion that would have completed her performance, I felt something settle inside me with almost mathematical precision. The humiliation she had engineered was obvious now, laid out in front of me like a business strategy deck. She had curated the audience, controlled the narrative, and positioned herself as a triumphant heroine breaking free from an oppressive structure. In her version of the evening, I was supposed to play the wounded husband, blindsided and desperate, pleading publicly so she could appear powerful and desired, the woman bold enough to walk away while a man begged for her return. I looked at her for exactly 3 seconds, not in anger, not in disbelief, but with a steady gaze that held no visible emotion. I let her see that I understood what she had done. I let her see that I was not confused. Then I broke eye contact, adjusted the cuff of my navy suit jacket as if concluding a routine meeting, and stepped off the edge of the spotlight. I walked through the crowd without rushing and without hesitation. The applause that had filled the ballroom moments earlier began to falter, clapping tapering off in uneven bursts as people realized I was not participating in the spectacle. Conversations paused mid-sentence. I could feel their attention shifting from her triumphant posture to my retreating back. No one tried to stop me. No one spoke. The music that swelled in celebration now sounded awkwardly loud against a growing silence. I did not look back. The hallway outside the ballroom was quiet, carpeted in muted gold and navy patterns that absorbed the sound of my footsteps. I pressed the elevator button and waited alone, my reflection in the mirrored doors appearing calm, composed, almost attached. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and descended to the lobby, passing through the polished marble space without acknowledging the front desk staff, who watched me with polite curiosity. The Chicago night air hit me sharply as I stepped outside. The city lights shimmered against the river, traffic moving steadily as if nothing monumental had just happened upstairs. I handed the valet my ticket, thanked him evenly, and drove home through familiar streets that felt strangely distant, as though I were observing my own life from outside of it. Back in the condo, I loosened my tie and placed my suit jacket carefully over the back of a chair. The space was silent. The only sound, the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muted city noise filtering through the windows. I poured myself a glass of bourbon. Not a heavy-handed pour, but measured, deliberate. I sat on the leather couch facing the skyline and let the events replay in my mind without emotion, analyzing the way I would assess a market disruption. By midnight, she still had not come home. I checked the time once, then set my phone face down on the coffee table. There were no messages from her, no missed calls. That alone told me everything I needed to know. She expected a reaction. She expected my phone to light up her screen with apologies, anger, confusion, anything that would confirm she still had influence over me. She expected pursuit. She expected to feel chase, validated by my panic. I felt none. Instead, I considered logistics, assets, accounts, ownership. The condo was mine, inherited well before our marriage. Most investments were structured conservatively, separate and documented. I had always believed in contingency planning, not out of distrust, but out of habit. Now that habit felt less like caution and more like foresight. The bourbon burned slowly down my throat, steady and grounding. The clock on the wall ticked past 12:30, then 1. The city continued its rhythm outside, indifferent and alive. I did not call her. I did not text. I did not check her social media to see how the evening had evolved after my departure. I allowed the silence to stretch deliberately, knowing it would be louder to her than any argument I could have staged in that ballroom. When I finally stood and turned off the lights, the condo felt different, not emptier, but clearer. Whatever narrative she had tried to construct had required my participation. Without it, her performance had no second act. And for the first time in months, I felt entirely in control of my own reaction. Sunday morning, I woke up before my alarm, not from anxiety, but from a sense of decision already made. The city outside was quiet, pale winter light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the condo that had been mine long before Emily ever stepped into it. I lay still for a few seconds, listening to silence, registering that she had not come home at all. There were no shoes by the door, no faint scent or perfume lingering in the hallway. The absence felt factual rather than emotional. I moved with deliberate calm. Coffee first. Black. No music, no television, no distractions. I opened my laptop at the dining table overlooking the river and logged into our joint accounts. Years of financial discipline made the process straightforward. I reviewed balances, transaction histories, automatic payments. There was no anger in the way I navigated the numbers, only clarity. I calculated her exact share down to the dollar and initiated a transfer into her personal account. Not a penny less, not a penny more. Clean, documented, final. After funds cleared internally, I removed her as an authorized user on every joint credit line and investment portal. I updated passwords across banking platforms, cloud storage, utilities, and security systems, replacing shared phrases with randomized strings generated through my password manager. Each change felt procedural, not vindictive. I then contacted our insurance provider and informed them that we were formally separating households. I requested documentation to initiate the necessary adjustments to coverage and liability. My voice on the phone was steady, professional, the way it is during high-value negotiations. By mid-morning, I scheduled a locksmith for Monday at 8 sharp. I also accessed the building's management portal and reset the garage entry code and the condo security panel credentials. The system confirmation email arrived seconds later, crisp and impersonal. It felt appropriate. Then I began packing. I entered the bedroom and opened her closet. Dresses arranged by color. Heels aligned carefully on the lower racks. Handbags displayed like curated trophies. I did not rush. I folded each item neatly into large moving boxes I had picked up from the storage supply store down the street. I labeled them with a black marker in clean block letters. Clothing winter, clothing formal, cosmetics, office equipment, personal files. Her vanity drawer was filled with meticulously organized products, each one placed into bubble wrap before being packed. Her home office contained branded folders, a ring light, a laptop stand, framed certifications from marketing conferences. I packed everything methodically, leaving no ambiguity about ownership. By early afternoon, the condo looked noticeably different, lighter, stripped of her aesthetic choices. I loaded the boxes into my SUV in organized stacks and drove to a climate-controlled storage facility on West Elm Street that I had reserved online. The unit was clean, dry, secure. I arranged the boxes inside, stacking them in accessible rows rather than cramming them in carelessly. I closed the metal door and secured it with a new lock I had purchased on site. At exactly 3 in the afternoon, I sent her a single text message containing the storage facility address, unit number, and access code. I added one final sentence stating that all her personal belongings had been relocated and that she could retrieve them at her convenience. Her call came within seconds. Her voice was sharp, furious, layered with disbelief. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing, accused me of overreacting, of being dramatic, of trying to punish her. I let her speak until she paused for breath. Then I reminded her calmly that she had publicly declared herself single in front of 50 witnesses. I stated that I was respecting her declaration. I told her that single people do not share my home. There was silence on the other end for a moment, followed by a shift in her tone from outrage to shock. She had expected pursuit, conflict, negotiation. She had not expected execution. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I simply informed her that the financial separation had already been completed and that the locks and access codes were being changed the following morning. I wish her well in her newly reclaimed independence. When the call ended, I stood in the quiet of my condo once again. The river continued moving outside, steady and indifferent. Inside, everything felt orderly, not chaotic, not vengeful, just resolved. She showed up Sunday evening, just after sunset, pounding on the door hard enough that the sound echoed down the hallway outside my condo. The security camera notification lit my phone first, and when I opened a live feed, I saw her standing there in the same red cocktail dress from the party. The fabric slightly wrinkled now, the confidence from the stage replaced with something far more frantic. Her mascara was smudged beneath her eyes, not artfully, but from real tears or exhaustion. She looked less like a woman reclaiming independence, and more like someone who had lost control of a script. I opened the door, but did not step aside. She started talking immediately, her words tumbling over each other, demanding that we talk, that I stop acting cold, that I not throw 8 years away over what she called symbolic gesture. She claimed she only wanted me to fight for us, to show passion, to prove that I still wanted her enough to interrupt her declaration and pull her into some grand romantic reversal. She said she thought I would storm the stage, grab the microphone, confess undying love, and make the room witness our dramatic reconciliation. I listened without interrupting. When she paused, I told her calmly that respect is not proven through public humiliation, and that love is not measured by how convincingly someone can perform desperation in front of an audience. I told her that what she orchestrated was not vulnerability but theater, and that I do not compete for affection in ballrooms filled with spectators. She admitted, almost offensively, that she wanted a dramatic scene, that she believed if I fought publicly, it would show everyone how powerful our connection was. She said she thought it would reignite something between us, that tension and spectacle create intensity. I explained evenly that intensity is not the same as trust, and that I refuse to participate in narratives designed for applause. She tried to step past me into the condo, and I blocked the doorway without touching her. I repeated that she declared herself single and that I was honoring her words. Then I closed the door. Over the next 2 weeks, she escalated. She appeared at my gym on a Tuesday morning, standing near the entrance as I finished a workout, dressed impeccably as if she had timed her arrival to intersect with my routine. I acknowledged her presence with a brief nod and walked past without slowing down. 2 days later, she waited near the entrance of my office parking garage, leaning against her car, claiming she just happened to be in the area. I informed her through the rolled-down window that unannounced visits were inappropriate and drove inside without further discussion. She showed up at the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon, approaching my cart with exaggerated coincidence, reaching for the same bottle of olive oil as if we were actors in a romantic comedy scene. I paid for my items and left without engaging. Then came the gestures. A large bouquet of white lilies arrived at my office reception desk with a handwritten note about destiny and second chances. I instructed the receptionist to donate the flowers to a nearby hospital. A week later, another delivery arrived, this time roses, accompanied by a letter filled with flowing script describing how the party was a mistake born from insecurity. I filed the letter without responding. The most elaborate display happened during a client meeting outside my building. As I stepped out with 2 investors discussing a redevelopment project, a street violinist began playing a dramatic love theme directly across the sidewalk. I immediately recognized a melody from our wedding reception. She stood a few feet away watching, expecting a public shift in expression. Instead, I continued the conversation with my clients, acknowledged the musician with polite nod, and entered the building. Later, I learned she had hired him specifically for that moment. Each attempt reinforced the same truth. She valued spectacle over sincerity. Every apology was staged, every gesture calibrated for visibility. There was always an audience, even if only imagined. I remained calm not out of spite, but because clarity leaves little room for theatrics. The more elaborate her efforts became, the more certain I felt that I was no longer interested in participating in a life built on performance. What happened next was not loud or explosive, but it was unmistakable. The same people who had stood in that ballroom clapping and cheering began reaching out to me quietly, almost cautiously, as if they were approaching something fragile. The first text came 3 days after the party from one of her coworkers I had met at multiple networking events. He wrote that he had been uncomfortable during the announcement, but had gone along with the energy of the room. He admitted it felt cruel, in hindsight. Over the next week, similar messages trickled in. Not dramatic apologies, not grand declarations of loyalty, just small admissions that something about the spectacle had not sat right. The shift became more visible when Madison, her best friend of over a decade, asked to meet me for coffee. I agreed, not out of curiosity, but out of clarity. Madison looked tired when she sat across from me, stirring her drink without taking a sip. She confessed that for months Emily had been framing me as emotionally distant, portraying me as cold, career-obsessed, and inattentive. She said Emily had built a narrative slowly, planting seeds in conversations so that when the public announcement came, it would feel justified. Madison admitted she had believed parts of it at first because the story had been told so consistently. But when I walked out of that ballroom without anger, without pleading, without trying to control the situation, it disrupted the storyline entirely. The villain does not usually exit calmly and pay for the ending without protest. Even her sister Lauren, who had been the loudest voice cheering that night, eventually reached out. She did not apologize outright, but she admitted Emily had miscalculated badly. She said the expectation had been that I would react publicly, that there would be tears or confrontation, something dramatic to validate the empowerment narrative. When that did not happen, the celebration fell hollow. Lauren said the energy in the room shifted the moment I walked out, that the applause had turned awkward almost immediately. Emily attempted to regain control of the narrative through social media. She posted long captions about reclaiming autonomy and breaking free from outdated expectations. She used phrases like choosing yourself and refusing to shrink for comfort. The photos were polished, carefully curated, champagne glasses and smiling friends in the background. But the comments did not unfold the way she expected. People began asking why something so serious had been handled publicly instead of privately. Some questioned why a divorce announcement had been framed as a performance. Others noted that empowerment does not require humiliation. The tone shifted gradually. Supportive emojis became neutral responses. Then silence. Friends who once reposted her content stopped engaging. Invitations she had once received automatically no longer appeared. The same colleagues who had toasted her independence began maintaining professional distance. Within a month, the social circle that had applauded her declaration started thinning out around her. I did not encourage any of it. I did not defend myself publicly. I did not post explanations or counter-narratives. I continued going to work, maintaining my routines, meeting clients, living quietly. The absence of reaction became its own statement. Without conflict to rally around, her story lost momentum. Spectacle requires opposition to sustain itself. Without my participation, there was no ongoing drama to consume. By the end of the month, it was evident that her support system had fractured. The same crowd that filled that ballroom with applause no longer answered her calls with the same enthusiasm. Group dinners happened without her. Networking invitations bypassed her inbox. The energy that once surrounded her had dissipated, replaced by a cautious distance. I observed it from the periphery, not with satisfaction, but with recognition. Narratives built on performance are fragile. When the audience realizes it has been part of production rather than a truth, applause turns into silence. And silence, I had learned, is far more powerful than any argument. About a month after the party, on a night when the wind whipped rain sideways against the glass of my living room windows, she came back one last time. I was sitting on the couch reviewing a property valuation report when the intercom buzzed sharply, cutting through the low hum of the storm. I did not move at first. The building rarely had unexpected visitors at that hour. When it buzzed again, longer this time, I stood and walked to the security panel mounted near the kitchen. Her face filled the small screen. She was standing under the overhang near the entrance, but the rain had already soaked through her coat. Her hair clung to her cheeks and neck. Mascara streaked faintly beneath her eyes. She looked smaller somehow, shoulders slightly hunched. No trace of the stage presence she had wielded so effortlessly weeks earlier. The woman who had stood in a ballroom, declaring liberation, into a microphone was gone. In her place was someone exhausted. She pressed the intercom button again, and her voice came through distorted by static and rain. She asked to talk. She said she just needed 5 minutes. She said she had nowhere else to go tonight, that everything had spiraled, and she did not know how to fix it. The words tumbled out unevenly, stripped of polish. I watched her on the screen without responding. I felt no surge of anger, no vindication, no satisfaction. What I felt was distance. Not cruelty, not indifference born from spite, but detachment that had settled in gradually over weeks of clarity. I had already processed the loss of what we were. What stood outside in the rain was not my wife anymore, not in the way that mattered. She kept pressing the intercom button for 5 minutes straight, her voice cracking as she alternated between apology and pleading. She said she made a mistake. She said she misjudged everything. She said she did not expect things to unravel the way they had. The storm intensified, rain streaking across the camera lens until her image blurred slightly. I did not buzz her in. Eventually, she stepped back from the panel. She stood there for a moment, looking up toward the building as if trying to guess which window was mine. Then she crouched down near the entrance, pulling something from her bag. Through the camera, I saw her place a folded piece of paper carefully beside the door, weighed down with a small stone to keep it from blowing away. She left without looking back. The next morning, after the storm had passed and the sidewalks were still damp, I went downstairs. The note was exactly where I had seen her leave it, edges wrinkled from moisture but still intact. My name was written across the front in her handwriting. I picked it up, held it for a second, then dropped it into the trash bin beside the mailboxes without unfolding it. Whatever it contained belonged to a chapter already closed. Shortly after that night, I heard through mutual contacts that she had relocated to Phoenix. She framed it publicly as starting over, as a bold move toward reinvention. The phrasing was familiar, still polished, but there was less audience this time. Weeks later, an envelope arrived at my condo, addressed in formal print. Inside were divorce papers. No contest, no alimony. A clean split in accordance with the prenup we had signed years earlier, when we were pragmatic enough to plan for contingencies we never believed would materialize. The documents were clear, straightforward, devoid of drama. I read through them once at the dining table, where I had separated our accounts that Sunday morning. Then I signed immediately. There was no hesitation in my hand, no tremor, just ink on paper, a final confirmation of something that had already ended the moment she lifted that microphone. 3 months after everything collapsed in that ballroom, my life looked radically different, not because I forced change, but because I allowed space for it. The silence that followed the divorce was not empty, it was productive. At work, I immersed myself fully without distraction, focusing on long-term acquisitions and restructuring strategies that had been stalled during the turmoil. The market had shifted slightly in our favor, and I presented a redevelopment proposal to the executive board that had been in draft form for nearly a year. This time, I delivered it without the weight of personal instability pressing against my focus. 2 weeks later, I was promoted to senior director. The title came with expanded authority, a larger team, and equity participation that signaled long-term trust from the firm. The announcement was made internally. No theatrics, no champagne towers, just a brief meeting and a handshake from the managing partners. Outside of work, I began reconnecting with parts of myself that had been dormant. I reestablished contact with friends I had unintentionally neglected during the tension of the marriage. Dinners became relaxed and genuine rather than curated. I joined a cycling club that met at sunrise along the lakefront. The rhythm of pedaling in cold morning air, the steady sound of tires against pavement, the quiet camaraderie of people riding for discipline rather than display grounded me in a way I had not expected. There was no audience on those early rides, only effort and consistency. I also began dating someone new, slowly and without announcement. She is not interested in spectacle. She does not document every dinner, does not measure affection by public validation, does not equate intensity with love. Our conversations are direct and private. There are no stage gestures, no performative apologies, no attempts to manufacture drama for emotional proof. Respect is quiet, steady, and unadvertised. It exists in consistency rather than display. Through professional circles, I later heard that Emily struggled after relocating. The story of the anniversary stunt followed her farther than she anticipated. In industries built on networking and perception, reputation travels quickly. What was framed as empowerment in one room translated differently in others. Public humiliation, even when self-styled as liberation, leaves a residue that is difficult to wash away. Clients are cautious around volatility. Employers are wary of spectacle. The narrative she once controlled began shaping her instead. I do not take satisfaction in that. I simply acknowledge it as consequence. When I look back at that night in the ballroom, I do not regret walking away. In fact, the calm exit was the most honest reaction I could have offered. Love without respect collapses under pressure, no matter how polished it appears from the outside. Trust erodes quietly long before it shatters publicly. She wanted freedom in front of an audience, a declaration framed as triumph. I gave her exactly what she announced, without resistance, without theatrics. Some bridges, once burned publicly, cannot be rebuilt privately. The flames may die down, the smoke may clear, but the structure is altered permanently. I chose not to stand in the ashes arguing about what the bridge used to be. I chose to walk forward instead,